In this episode, we take a look at the lockdown files. The release of Matt Hancock's private messages are showing us a lot about what was known about COVID, but not revealed at the time, and how we were manipulated and free speech was suppressed.
Integrity is one of our values, so we wanted to speak up and shine a light on what's been happening over the last few years so that we can avoid it happening again. This is not to belittle that many people got sick or tragically died, but it's to gauge whether now, with the truth coming out, we can assess whether the government and the society's behaviour was disproportionate to the risk. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors podcast with me, James.
And me, Claire. It's cold today.
Cold. Don't know where you are, but it's cold and snowy in London town.
Well, it was snowy yesterday, but it is cold.
And you might hear that we're slightly nasally and snuffly
No, we're
and
not.
coffee.
No, we're not over it.
But there's a good
We're
reason
over
for that. Also, we missed the podcast last week. Apologies, listeners. But there is very, very good reasons for that. And it actually kind of related to what we're going to talk about today, which I think is going to be potentially very controversial, but I think it is important that we be open and we learn the lessons that are there to be learned. So we're going to be talking about the Telegraph's exclusives of the lockdown files, in particular the stuff that is now coming out about what was known about COVID and the response to it, but was suppressed.
And the reason we want to talk about that, then we'll say why we missed a episode last week, but the reason we want to talk about that is because obviously we are in the health and wellness industry, and it's really important to us, and freedom is really important to us, as is integrity. So actually, we touched on a couple of our values. James and I have very similar values. Integrity and freedom are two of them. And so that's why we wanted to really be fully in our integrity when we're talking to you about this today, this subject today. But before we get to that, what's been going on? What's been going on? Wow.
Well, one of us has been in hospital, haven't they?
I have been in hospital. So it's all very dramatic. And here's the thing. I have to say, it's made me very much realise that I'm not invincible. Not that I thought that I was, right? But actually, I got proper sick. So I was ill for about a week and a half. And then I got better, or so I thought. And then I went really downhill. I had a fever and I went to the doctor, and eventually I was in A&E, and they told me that I was put on a drip, and they told me that I had a bacterial lung infection, which really dented my ego, because I was like, how have I got sick? Well, how I've got sick, I'm going to be completely transparent with you, was I probably just started going back doing what I normally do too quickly. And that's the truth of it. You know, I love my training, I love my cardio, I love all of that stuff, and I probably just pushed myself too hard. It's a learning, we all do it, and I pushed myself too hard, and that was the result. So I was put on antibiotics. I finished those now, and I do feel much, much better. Yeah,
interesting. I've also been ill, not as ill as Claire, but we had our wedding anniversary. Yeah. So Saturday, give you an idea. This has been on and off for Claire for about 4 weeks, for me for about 3 weeks. Saturday, I was in the gym, did a great workout, felt really good. Went to the pub, watched the rugby. Saturday night, I had this intense sinus pain start overnight. Never had anything like it. Kind of soldiered through Sunday, which was we went away for our wedding anniversary. Sunday night was just awful with the pain in my head.
And then our wedding anniversary was
we had to cut short. I had to come home and basically go to bed for 2 days. Claire was fine. As I kind of dragged myself out of bed on Wednesday, suddenly Claire went downhill massively.
So it's just interesting, isn't it, that actually this is the sickest either of us have been ever in our life. Yeah. And it does make you, there are so many blessings actually that have come from that. It really made us slow down. We had to nurse each other at different various points, and it definitely made us more connected, and I think just reassess a few things, to be quite honest with you. And I don't think that's ever a bad thing. I think when you're forced to slow down and actually give your mental capacity time to slow down as well. I know with the business, for example, we've come back with renewed vigour and focus that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have had the opportunity to slow down. So there's always a blessing in everything. Always a blessing in everything.
So we are going to be talking about COVID today. So Claire and I have had COVID at least twice. And we say at least because we had something that felt a lot like COVID right at the start when it was all starting. Obviously, there was no test or anything, but we've definitely had it twice since then. But what we've had just now wasn't COVID according to the test, but was way worse.
It was
way
nasty.
Worse.
It was nasty. So, and we know lots of our poor, lovely clients are very sick and poorly with COVID and various other things at the moment. So, just look after yourself. None of us are invincible, even if we think we are. And yeah, just take care because there's lots of stuff going around at the moment. So let's get into
this. Right. So obviously, the Telegraph has an exclusive. They've got a treasure trove of Matt Hancock's WhatsApps between him and various people in government. And what is fascinating, it is revealing a lot of the facts that the government knew but held back from the people and suppressed. And the way their behaviour was actually deliberately trying to instill an attitude of an environment of fear to get more control over people. And here's the sad thing. At the time this was happening, a lot of people were pointing out that this was what was going on. They're like, hold on a sec, what is actually the deal with COVID? Why is this response so seemingly disproportionate? Why are we instilling such fear into people? And why are we shutting the whole economy down, the world down, and locking people in their homes? And sadly, what we see now, sadly at the time, a lot of people it really divided people. And people who were actually just even asking questions about it were ruthlessly slammed down.
And that was us. Let's just be really, really blunt. The reason we're doing this is because that was us. We were just asking a few questions. That was all. We weren't pretending that people weren't getting sick. We weren't pretending that people weren't dying from it. It wasn't that at all. We were just looking into some of the statistics and asking some normal questions.
Well, I think that the thing was, people were getting sick. Tragically, people were dying. But the question we're asking is the response proportionate to what's going on? Because, here's the thing. In history, before we get into the details of messages, in history, we've never had a pandemic where you lock down everyone. It's the vulnerable lockdown or the sicker lockdown. So it's kind of unprecedented from that perspective. And it was scary to us at the time. And I guess people have forgotten now, but how quickly and willingly people were willing to give up their freedoms, basic freedoms. Remember, you were locked in your house. You couldn't go out. If you wanted to move more than a certain distance, you were questioned about why you were out in the streets. Businesses were shut and they went under.
And you know what was scarier was how divided everyone became. That's what really, the judgment on people. I would honestly say, we're not completely without judgment, of course not, because we're human. But I would say, I'm speaking for myself here, I do not judge people. What people want to do with their lives, they can do with their lives. But just the level of judgment and division that came at people was so, it was so upsetting to see how people turned on each other. Like families. Yeah. Families, relationships broke up because of this.
Well, wasn't there hotlines set up? It's like if you see someone you think's breaking lockdown, if they're going out. Yeah, it was like, there was a thing of we've never had it in this country, right? It's very un-British. But sneak on your neighbours. Call the police if you think they've got people around their house. And people were doing it. People were doing it. So I think it's important that we look at what we now know as truth that's coming out from these messages and from other sources as well, and we learn the lessons from this so that we don't fall into this trap again.
It was fascinating how quickly we gave up our freedom without any question at all. If you just look at society and think, my goodness, I never thought that would happen, and yet everyone just gave up their freedoms, became really divided, became really judgmental, almost overnight. And like James has said, everyone just forgot. Everyone's got on with their lives now. But here's the thing, those people that were judged, that were divided, that were asking just some simple questions because they care about freedom and they care about the truth, those people, we haven't forgotten.
No, we haven't, and you shouldn't forget either. So I'm going to rewind right back to the beginning before we get into the messages. Rewind right back to the beginning. You know, when this started, because again, people forget, our memories get hazy. But do you remember when this started? When we started hearing about this novel coronavirus coming out of Wuhan, China, and we were shown pictures on television, video footage of bodies
on the floor
in the street in China, and people in hazmat suits coming out. Now, yes, people got sick from COVID, people died from COVID. But here's what we now know about COVID. It's not like, I'm feeling well enough to pop down to the shops.
And then I've
just dropped dead in the street, which is what we're being shown. We're seeing people with shopping bags on the floor dead and people in hazmat suits taken away. That is not how COVID works.
And
right?
why did no one say
And why did no one say that? Why were we shown that? What that was the first fear thing. Here's a virus so deadly, you could be feeling well enough to go to the shops, and next minute you're dead. And that's not what happens at all.
Why was no one saying, well, that's not actually what happens?
And while we're on that, origins of the virus, again, did it come? We still don't know. Did it jump from animals, or did it, was it gain of function research in a lab? But here's the interesting thing: people who are suggesting that it could be gain of function research gone wrong, a lab leak. Well, again, they're conspiracy theorists to things. And the FBI and another government agency in the US now say there's a pretty certain degree of probability that this was a man-made virus that got out of a lab.
Strange that.
So this is the Biden administration saying, yeah, we probably think it did come from a lab. So let's not forget that at the start. Now we're winding into what happened, and we don't want to go too much into the whole vaccines debate. But here's the thing: at the time the vaccine was rolled out, remember it was like you must be vaccinated, and again. Where have we ever had such relentless saturation for vaccination? I'll say something really important here. There were a lot of epidemiologists at the time saying you should never vaccinate during a pandemic, right? In history, it's never done because you risk the disease mutating, moving fast. So that's point number one. And again, they were shouted down. But here's the thing. We're told it was to protect other people or it will stop transmission. The European Court, if you haven't, go and look for it online, have held a hearing where the Pfizer were there and they were asked categorically, did you test your vaccine to see if it would prevent transmission? No, we did not. So when we were told, if you got the vaccine, it prevent transmission, there was zero medical or scientific evidence that it would stop transmission. In fact, we now know that the vaccine isn't effective in stopping transmission. But why were we told this lie in the first place?
And here's the thing, ignorance is not an excuse because, yes, you were misled. You were absolutely misled, and we were all misled, and we can understand why there was a lot of fear. So we're not taking this away from anyone, okay? Even we, right at the beginning, were like, hang on a minute, this is quite scary. Because of the massive overreaction, you were thinking, hang on a minute, this is going to spread like wildfire. So it's not a problem that you potentially were scared. We were all scared. But ignorance is not an excuse because the information was out there and voices were speaking up, but we were being silenced as cranks and conspiracy theorists.
Now, here's the thing, right? We have a sovereignty over our bodies, and it was a choice. It was a choice whether I want to have a highly experimental vaccine with unknown side effects from which the manufacturers are absolved from any kind of compensation or blame from anything. Do I want to put that in my body? If my choice is no, do you know what? At the time, people were being called your grandparent killers.
Yes.
You're irresponsible. You're a menace to society. Let us be clear. Pfizer themselves said they did no tests on whether it prevented transmission, and in fact, we know now having the vaccine does not prevent transmission. So
it was literally being. I'm sitting here just thinking about this, and even I have tried to forget that level of trauma for everyone, right? But I've actually tried to forget that because we were being called all sorts of things under the sun. It was, thankfully, we have lots of lovely friends and family around us that weren't judgmental, but we do know literally a lot of people. This is not just one friend there were a lot of people that split up with their partners around this, that they were ostracised from their family because of this. I mean, what is that about? Because we've got sovereignty and we've got choice over our own body.
And before we get into this again, let's talk about about the masking, right? So yes, here's the thing: if you have a high-grade surgical mask that is properly fitted properly fitted, properly replaced, then yes, that can help prevent infection. There are multiple studies now from all over the world that the way we're wearing like floppy fabric masks do nothing, and in fact probably more harmful to the health of the people wearing. How many of you kept a mask in your pocket for days on end and just kept putting it on and off,
breathing it out,
breathing it out? But yet the mask, don't say the mask did nothing, right? The mask probably did nothing to help prevent spread, but they did something very important. They divided society. And by having a mask up, we dehumanise people. And how many people out there said, oh, after we opened up again, I noticed people were a lot ruder, a lot angrier. Well, yes, we've been through a collective trauma, but also this masking dehumanises people. And it did cause this divide. You remember people were saying people who don't wear masks, they should not be allowed on public transport. They shouldn't be allowed in supermarkets.
Oh, we were also told that we shouldn't be allowed to have access to the NHS.
Yeah.
That was the big... If they get sick, they shouldn't have access to the NHS. And one of the other things I want to say about masks, if this was so deadly, why were we just dumping our masks on the ground outside and no one worrying about it? Surely there should be like bins.
Well, I think there was a great photo someone made of a landfill somewhere. It was just like literally tens of millions of masks.
But if we've got people in hazmat suits coming to look after the dead in Wuhan that are on the floor, why have we got just discarding masks all over the floor with this deadly disease everywhere and not worrying about whether they go into specialised bins?
Now, let's talk about one of my other favourite things, Partygate, right? Everyone was like, oh, the government got together and they were doing karaoke and having things with the lockdown. And everyone got outraged about the wrong thing. It's classic misdirection. It's like, oh, how dare they? I'm locked up in my house, but they're partying. What people were missing, the elephant in the room they're missing is like, these are the people that know most about the virus and the situation. They are not afraid to get together and party and do karaoke and sit on each other's laps. Why? Well, we know because it's all in these WhatsApp messages, right? And
we should be angry because there were so many people that lost their loved ones and they weren't allowed to spend those last moments with loved ones. And actually, that literally makes me like so devastated for people. But yes, be angry with the government, but then think, like James said, hang on a minute, how deadly did they really think it was? If they're out partying, like they've not just split me apart from my loved ones, from being able to see my friends, my family, and losing people that I haven't got to see, or actually funerals. My goodness, we couldn't actually hold funerals for people. Actually, should be thinking they weren't bothered.
No,
they weren't bothered.
So let's look at some of the stuff that's come out now that we now know, right? You know, at the time we called COVID's deadly. Remember, stay home. Protect everyone. You know, fear the virus. I think that was one of the catchphrases. The government's own models showed that an 80-year-old had a 94% survival rate. The risk to a 35-year-old was negligible. This is in the things between Boris. Boris is going, what? An 80-year-old's got a 94% survival rate. It's not worth shutting everything down for. These are the facts. It was an 80-year-old person had a 94% survival rate from COVID. 35-year-old, there's negligible risk. Again, that was not the impression that was given to us at the time. The other thing, remember the 14-day quarantine period? Actually, Chris Whitty went, 5 days will do it. But Matt Hancock said, well, we don't want to look like we might have got it wrong, so we're going to stick with 14 days, even though 5 would work.
And also, Chief Scientific Officer Chris Whitty said that the virus wasn't deadly enough, this is all coming out now, deadly enough to merit a fast-tracking a vaccine. Can we just hear that again? Chris Whitty said the virus wasn't deadly enough to merit a fast-tracking a vaccine. And any MPs who questioned...
Yeah, this is massive.
This is huge. Any MPs who questioned the COVID policies were actually frozen out. Frozen out completely.
There was this groupthink that just wanted to go harder and harder and harder and put more and more restrictions in place. And anyone that questioned it got frozen out of that group and shut down.
Monitored by the security services.
Well, I think this is one we need to be really aware of, right? This is frightening. This has come out. At the time, people were like, oh, you know, security services are monitoring people who are posting stuff. Everyone was like, oh, no, you're conspiracy theorists and you're paranoid. It's now come out as well that, yes, in these WhatsApp groups, that people were monitored by security services. But it's come out in other information, Freedom of Information Act, security services were actively monitoring people who were posting, questioning the COVID narrative. In fact, the press were also told that they couldn't question the COVID narrative or they'd lose their broadcast licenses as well.
Yes, can anyone remember that? Did you know that? Because, again, when that came out, we were like, but if you can't, where is the freedom of speech? Where is this free society gone? That even our media, who's corrupt anyway, but they're not able to question any other narrative apart from what we're being fed.
Well, in a sense, this is quite interesting, Claire. You know, the Telegraph has the exclusive on this.
Yeah.
So you would expect them, obviously, to be leaning on it, but you would expect other news outlets, because it's such a big story, to pick up on it, but they're not. And I think it's almost like an embarrassment that journalists were not doing their jobs of asking the right questions.
Well, but because they were under pressure not to. They were being pressurised by security services not to.
We know from the WhatsApp group that the government told the police to go hard to frighten people. So this is like the state seeing the state apparatus against the people, like frighten them. That was what they wanted to do, frighten the people. Let's make the police go really hard on them. The government openly discussed, when should we release info on a new variant to ramp up the fear? We'll tell them about the Kent variant and we don't know much about it, get them more scared so they comply more. All this stuff. You can listen to this and go, no, it's not true. Go check the WhatsApp messages. It is all there. Go check the studies.
And I would just say again, this is only because we are not sitting here saying we told you so. That is not what we're doing. This isn't a rant about, oh my goodness, we were right, you were... No, it's not about that at all. It's about making sure that this never happens again. This is about having a different narrative and being confident enough now, given what's coming out over and over again, that this is what we felt right at the beginning. This is what we felt all the way through. But because integrity is so important to us and the truth and freedom is so important to us, that's why we're doing it. It's not that, we told you so. It's not that at all. It's because we really, really care about society, about people's health, and actually people having sovereignty and control over their own selves.
Yeah. You've got the whole schools being shut down. Again, that was the thing. We just want to make sure that everyone's restricted. Again, studies have since then have shown that way more harm was done to children.
My goodness.
By excluding them from classrooms. Child abuse
masking
went up. Performance in exams, academics has gone down. They have more anxiety, more stress. And that was shut down. The scientific advice at the time was do not restrict, do not shut children out from schools. But again, the government overruled it because they just said we want to make it as scary as possible for people. There's also in the WhatsApp, saying the group saying the second lockdown was completely unneeded. They actually knew the data on it was wrong, but they went ahead anyway, and they made stuff up. Matt COVID's famous thing of we want to get 100k COVID tests. They decided to change the rules. So if a COVID test had been dispatched, not used, but just sent out, he got Amazon to send out tens of thousands of tests on the last day and just said, we've done 100k tests. I mean, this stuff is mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing.
It's also come out in these WhatsApps that the scientific community said there was no evidence, basically, for the effectiveness of banning mass gatherings. They're from a virus perspective, there's no evidence that it's going to be useful. Let's not forget, not only were we banned from leaving our homes, but when people were tempted to get together to ask the questions, police were using batons against people demonstrating against measures. We saw this in central London. Police baton charging people who were peacefully asking questions about the COVID rules and the lockdown. Do you know why?
Because we were there. And it was really important for us to be there and actually stay in our integrity and stay on focus. And I'm just talking about this. I actually can't believe what happened and what transpired, to be quite honest with you. And people
forget, but this should be raising alarm bells for you, right? The whole thing was based on inaccurate, faulty data. Yes, we can argue, they didn't know and they're trying to do the best they can. Well, it tipped over from that. It's clear from these WhatsApp messages, it tipped over to deliberate manipulation. Let's increase the fear. But the main thing I want to be is the government used the state security apparatus against the people. We only see that in totally autocratic, dictatorship-style countries.
And we also know, this was a massive red flag to me, when celebrities were doing dance music videos around get the vaccine, and they were being paid by the government to do these videos. They had a massive, their budget for PR to get celebrities to endorse the vaccine and masks and everything was astronomical. They spent a fortune on this PR campaign. And I'm thinking, does no one else thinking this is really, really odd that these these people are being paid to force others to have a vaccine. Is that right? I didn't think it was right.
Just the crazy stuff. Like, remember this. Remember when pubs could open but only outdoors, but not indoors, right? So you got like loads of people packed in a tent shivering, but that's safe from having them indoors. And when that rule came in that like you could go to the pub, but you had to have a substantial meal, and there was a whole thing about the government even having meetings about whether a Scotch egg. Listen, what? The virus won't get you if you've got a Scotch egg with your pint. If you've just got the pint, you're at risk. It made no sense at the time. We see it was just completely made up.
And this is why we are saying ignorance is not an excuse, because just anyone with any sense of, oh my God, just common sense. I mean, who would think that if I'm sitting here with a Scotch egg and a pint, then obviously COVID's not going to get me? Who would think? I don't understand. And who went along with that? Who said, no, that makes complete sense?
We want to talk about lessons from history. I mean, obviously the situation has changed now. We are free, but we have to remember, right? You know, people always hold up the example of Nazi Germany, but it's not like the Nazis came to power and straight away started persecuting, you know, the Jews, the homosexuals. You know, it's steady drip over time. Oh, here's a new rule. Oh, here's a new rule. Here's a new rule. And we saw this happening during lockdown.
That was years they did that for. Years and years and years. People think that it was just Hitler came to power and then that happened. It wasn't. It was...
happened slowly over time.
Slowly over time.
And luckily, you know, the situation has changed now, but we need to be aware of this stuff and what the government and the media were colluding in doing.
Oh, and
here's something that they suppressed from you, right? So if you go...
Obesity. You're about to say about obesity.
If you go and look at the Office of National Statistics, the biggest comorbidity factor for COVID, it just says diabetes. So we can't see if that was type 1 or type 2. Obviously, type 1 is just a disease you can have. Type 2 is largely from when you're overweight or obese. I would hypothesise it probably is type 2, because we do know from speaking to government sources that the biggest factor for having complications and dying from COVID was being obese. And in fact, if you remember the surgeon, when I think who was it? One of the MPs at hospital, and the surgeon was like, "I'm not going to get vaccinated," and they said, "Why not?" He said, "Because the people coming into this ER room do not look like me." Yeah. And what he meant by that was like they're not obese people. But this was this was at the time. It was felt it was not PC enough to say this, that the biggest risk from COVID was being overweight or obese.
I remember when I went out and said that.
So we had all this other stuff going on, like, you know, not you have to have a Scotch egg with your pint, you know, all this stuff. But they didn't just say, look, obesity's the thing. If you're overweight, obese, you're at the most risk. They never came out and said it.
Well, because we're in this woke society that can't actually say what the facts are in case you get shot down. And actually, we pointed this out because, again, right at the beginning, we were looking at the stats all the time, constantly looking at the stats. And right at the beginning, it was very, very clear that if you are obese, you have it was a huge indicator about how serious COVID was going to be for you. And I remember us saying it, and I remember us just absolutely getting shot down. So...
yeah, so this isn't us to sit there smug and everything, right? And I'm sure that these lockdown files are still coming out. More is going to come out, but you know, I'm sure more is going to come out from around the world, and we will realise just to what level we were misled. Just remember, you probably stayed home. You isolated, didn't see friends or relatives. You might have even tipped into judging others who weren't, you know, behaving the way that you thought you behaved.
Yes.
You believed the official narrative.
Yeah.
There's more going to come out. It's important that we learn from this and we do not make the same mistakes of laying down our freedoms without reasonable cause.
And that we do not become a divided society like we became, because that just is a slippery slope. And that's why this is important. That's why we're passionate about this, because it was so devastating for us to see society just become what it became. And it's really, really important, like James said, that we never allow this to happen again, that we ask questions, that we use our common sense, that we unite, that we don't divide, and we don't give up our freedoms, and we don't let people that are clearly trying to control us, because we are sovereign beings and we have a right to be free.
Right. I hope you enjoyed that. Please, you know, do if you're kind of going, oh, I didn't know that. Do check it out. Just to start researching some of this stuff, because you know the information is all out there.
It's our responsibility. It is our responsibility, and it's our responsibility to also look after the generations to come. right? The generations underneath us are messed up because of this. Their schooling, and we've got a whole swathe of youngsters anxious because of this. And we need to do our due diligence and our duty, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they never have to experience this again, and that they know what it is to be a sovereign, free being.
Right, sending you all so much love.
Sending you so much love, and that is it for today.
For today.
Mwah.
We'll be back soon. Have a good one.
Yeah.
You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors.
Yeah.